In 1987, Reebok was the #1 shoe brand in the world. Not Nike, not Adidas, Reebok. A tiny British company that started in a teenager's bedroom above a sweet shop in Bolton, England, had dethroned the most powerful sports brand on the planet. They did it without a superstar athlete, without a billion-dollar campaign, without a single male customer in their target market. They did it because of aerobics. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what happened next. Because Reebok didn't slowly fade, didn't gradually lose ground, didn't get out-competed by a better product. Reebok got bought, and the company that bought it paid $3.8 billion to own it, then spent 15 years quietly, methodically, almost invisibly, destroying it. This is a story about what happens when a brand loses itself. Not to a scandal, not to a bad product, but to someone who was supposed to be on its side. There's a quote that has never fully left the sneaker industry. Paul Fireman, the man who built Reebok into a $4 billion empire, who took it from 6 employees to the top of the global market, was asked about the Adidas acquisition years later. His answer was 5 words. Paid almost $4 billion to destroy it. He was talking about his own company, the brand he had spent 25 years building, the one he handed to Adidas in 2005 believing they would take it further. He called it the biggest foolish decision he had ever witnessed. From $3.8 billion paid in 2005 to $2.5 billion received in 2021. A brand that was worth more than Adidas's entire U.S. operation when they bought it, sold for less than half the purchase price 16 years later. The question is not whether Reebok declined. That part is obvious. The question is, how does a brand that once dethroned Nike, that invented a category of shoes, that signed Allen Iverson to the most unique lifetime contract in sports history, that was written into the DNA of 1980s America, end up sold for parts? And who is actually responsible? Walk into almost any sneaker store in 2026 and you'll find Reebok somewhere. The classic leather, the Club C, the Freestyle, the same silhouette that conquered America in 1982, still on shelves, still being worn by people who weren't alive when it launched. The brand exists. The logo is recognized globally. The shoes are bought, worn, and in certain circles, genuinely coveted. Authentic Brands Group, the company that purchased Reebok from Adidas in 2021, has big plans. Retail sales target, $10 billion within 5 years. Allen Iverson is now Vice President of Basketball. Shaquille O'Neal is President of the Basketball Division. The brand is trying, visibly and with significant resources, to reassemble something. From the outside, it looks like a legacy brand in the middle of a comeback story. And maybe it is. But the surface version of the Reebok story, the aerobics boom, the pump technology, the AI lifetime deal, the CrossFit era, the Adidas chapter, the ABG revival, leaves out the parts that actually explain how one of the most dominant brands in history ended up being sold twice in 16 years for diminishing returns. Because Reebok's real story is not a comeback story. It's a cautionary tale about what corporate ownership does to brand identity, and about whether a brand can survive being owned by someone who needed it to lose. 1. Bolton, Lancashire, England. A 14-year-old boy named Joseph William Foster begins making running shoes in his bedroom above his father's sweet shop. Not a workshop, not a factory. His bedroom. Foster has an obsession. Speed. He believes that the right shoe can make a runner faster. He experiments with spikes, with leather geometry, with the physics of how a foot pushes off the ground. By the time he is old enough to call himself a businessman, he has founded J.W. Foster and Sons, a company that will go on to make shoes for the fastest people in the world. In 1924, at the Paris Olympics, British runners Harold Abrahams and Eric Liddell win gold medals wearing Foster's shoes. If you've seen the film Chariots of Fire, those shoes. That company. The family business continues. Joseph's son takes over. His grandsons join. And then, the way it always happens in family businesses, cracks appear. By the late 1950s, Joe and Jeff Foster, Joseph's grandsons, are growing frustrated. They see the brand operating in what they call a bygone era. They want to push further, go global, innovate beyond what the family structure will allow, and the family itself is at war. Different visions, different personalities, different ideas about what the company should become. It echoes the Dassler brothers. The same structure. A family business fracturing under the weight of ambition and proximity. In 1958, Joe and Jeff make the break. They leave. They move to nearby Bury, Lancashire, and start over. They try to call the new company Mercury Sports Footwear, but Mercury is already taken. They can't register it, so they open an Afrikaans dictionary, a dictionary their grandfather had won in a running race years before, and find a word. Reebok, a gray South African antelope, fast, agile, built for movement. They rename the company Reebok. For the next 20 years, Reebok makes running shoes in England. Good shoes, innovative shoes. They win a following among serious runners, but the business stays small. British. Export deals are slow. The American market, the only market that really matters for a shoe brand that wants to be global, feels impossibly far away. Then 1979 happens. At the National Sporting Goods Association trade show in Chicago, a man named Paul Fireman is walking the floor. He's an American outdoors gear wholesaler. Not a shoe person, not an athlete, not a visionary in any obvious sense. He sells camping equipment. He sees Reebok's display. Something catches his attention. He approaches Joe Foster. Foster is cautious. He doesn't know this man, doesn't know if he can be trusted, but Fireman is persistent. He secures the exclusive rights to distribute Reebok in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It takes time. The early years are slow. In 1981, Reebok's total U.S. sales are $1.5 million. Then Fireman and a California sales rep named Angel Martinez notice something nobody else in the shoe industry is paying attention to. Women are working out. Not just jogging, not just occasional exercise. They are filling aerobics classes across America in numbers that nobody expected. The fitness revolution is happening in real time, and Nike and Adidas, both obsessively focused on men's performance athletic shoes, are completely ignoring it. Fireman sees the gap. In 1982, Reebok releases the Freestyle, the first athletic shoe designed specifically for women. Soft, garment leather, comfortable enough to wear all day, stylish enough to wear outside the gym, functional enough to actually work in. It is the right product at the exact right moment. Jane Fonda is seen wearing it. Sybil Shepherd wears a pair to the Emmy Awards in 1985. The aerobics class becomes a cultural phenomenon, and Reebok is its uniform. Sales go from $1.5 million in 1981 to $13 million in 1982, then $66 million, then $307 million, then $1.4 billion. In 1987, Reebok overtakes Nike as the #1 athletic shoe brand in the United States. Read that again. The #1 brand. Above Nike, above Adidas. A company that started with one man making shoes in his bedroom in Bolton, England. This is one of the most remarkable rises in the history of consumer brands, and it happened because Reebok saw a market that the giants were too arrogant or too focused to notice. It happened because a camping equipment wholesaler named Paul Fireman took a risk on a British shoe brand he barely knew. But here's the part that matters for everything that follows. Reebok's dominance was built on a single moment of perfect timing. The aerobics boom was real, but it was also finite. When the boom slowed, when aerobics became just another fitness option rather than a cultural obsession, Reebok would need something else to stand on. And what they chose to stand on would define them for the next 4 decades. As the aerobics boom began to cool in the late 1980s, Reebok did something smart. They moved into basketball. The Pump, released in 1989. A shoe with a built-in inflation mechanism. You literally pump it up around your foot for a custom fit. Shaquille O'Neal wore it. It was technological, visual, conversation starting in exactly the way a basketball shoe needed to be. Sales continued. Reebok stayed near the top. And then came Allen Iverson. 1. The NBA Draft. Iverson goes number 1 overall to the Philadelphia 76ers, a player so raw, so gifted, so genuinely different from every other player in the league that the entire basketball world stops to watch him. Nike approaches Iverson. Jordan Brand, which Nike owns, approaches Iverson. He could have been the first signature athlete for the Jordan brand, playing in the shadow of Michael Jordan's legacy. Iverson chooses Reebok, not for the money alone. He would say later that Reebok made him comfortable, made him feel seen, offered him something that felt like loyalty rather than just a transaction. He signs a 10-year, $50 million deal. Then, in 2001, after he leads the 76ers to the NBA Finals and wins MVP, Reebok offers him something no shoe company had ever offered any athlete. A lifetime deal, not just a long-term contract, a lifetime contract. $800,000 per year for the rest of his life. No ongoing promotional obligations after a certain point, and a $32 million trust fund, locked until Iverson turns 55 in 2030. The contract structure was unusual. It protected Iverson from himself, built deliberately to ensure that even if Iverson spent every dollar he earned during his playing career, which at a staggering rate he largely did, there would still be something waiting. The pairing of Reebok and Iverson was culturally significant beyond the numbers. Iverson represented something Reebok needed: authenticity, edge, a connection to black culture and hip-hop that felt earned rather than manufactured. The answer sneaker line, the question, the crossover dribble, the braids, the tattoos, the defiance. Reebok absorbed Iverson's identity, and Iverson absorbed Reebok's. They became the same thing for a generation of basketball fans. In 2003, Reebok made history again, signing Jay-Z for the S. Carter collection, the first non-athlete to have a signature shoe with a major brand. Then 50 Cent, the G-Unit collection. Reebok had found its second identity, not aerobics, but street culture. Hip-hop, the intersection of sports and music and authenticity that would define urban fashion for the next decade. By 2004, Reebok has a 10-year NBA contract, an NFL contract, an NHL acquisition, deals with the 4 major U.S. sports leagues simultaneously. Revenue of $379 billion. They are still not Nike, but they are formidable. Real, a genuine player. Paul Fireman has built something from a Chicago trade show encounter and a camping equipment background into one of the most culturally significant brands on the planet. And then he sells it. 1. Nike's market share in the U.S. is growing faster than anyone can stop it. The swoosh is becoming omnipresent, in basketball, in running, in lifestyle, in fashion. Nike is not just a shoe company anymore. It is a cultural institution. Adidas has approximately 5% of the U.S. market. Reebok has 17%. The Adidas CEO Herbert Hainer has been talking to Fireman for 3 years about a potential acquisition. The logic seems straightforward. Combine Adidas's European strength and global infrastructure with Reebok's American market share and cultural credibility. Together, they can challenge Nike. In August 2005, the deal is announced. $3.8 billion. At the time, it is the largest acquisition in the history of the sporting goods industry. Hainer describes it as a combination of 2 of the most respected and well-known companies in the worldwide sporting goods industry. He says publicly that the 2 brands will compete with each other. Brother versus brother. What he doesn't say, what the brand analysts and market observers would only understand years later, is what actually happens when a company owns 2 brands that compete directly with each other. They don't both win. One wins, and the other makes room for it. Within 1 year of the acquisition, Adidas takes over Reebok's 10-year NBA contract, the contract Reebok had signed in 2001, the one that was supposed to run through 2011, and terminates it early. Adidas signs a new 11-year contract with itself as the supplier. 5 years of Reebok's NBA visibility. Gone. Handed to the parent brand. Then the NFL contract. Nike takes that from Reebok in 2012. Under Armour takes the MLB footwear license. The sports leagues that Reebok had assembled, the multi-league presence that made it a genuine athletic brand, were stripped away, one by one, year by year. By 2015, Adidas has 4% of the U.S. market. Reebok has 1%. Reebok's revenues, which were $3.79 billion when Adidas bought the brand, had fallen to $161 billion by 2020. And Adidas's own revenues? They tripled. Matt Powell, a sportswear analyst for NPD Group who tracked this process in real time, said it plainly. I think at the end of the day, the real reason for the demise of Reebok was that every decision was made in favor of Adidas, and that prevented Reebok from growing. But there is a more specific indictment, and it comes from the man who sold the brand. Paul Fireman, who had 17% U.S. market share when he sold, who had the NBA, the NFL, Allen Iverson, Jay-Z, a $379 billion business, looked back at what happened and said, "Smart men and women make foolish decisions sometimes. That was the biggest one I've ever seen that was foolish. Paid almost $4 billion to destroy it." He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was describing what he witnessed happen to the brand he spent his career building. And there was one moment, one specific, visible, undeniable moment that crystallized how far things had fallen. In 2011, Reebok was fined $25 million by the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. For what? For the Easy Tone sneaker. A shoe Reebok had marketed as capable of toning your muscles simply by walking in it. The FTC ruled that the claims were false, deceptive advertising. Reebok had to pay $25 million in refunds to customers. The brand that had launched the first serious women's athletic shoe in 1982, that had built its empire by genuinely serving women's fitness needs, was now paying $25 million for lying to women about whether a shoe would tone their glutes. It was not just a legal failure. It was a brand failure, a sign of how far an identity can drift when a brand loses clarity about what it actually stands for. Behind the acquisition drama, the licensing losses, and the FTC fine, the physical production of Reebok shoes continued without interruption. Like every major athletic brand, Reebok's manufacturing is almost entirely outsourced to a global network of contract factories. The vast majority of production happens in Asia, Vietnam, China, Indonesia, Bangladesh among the primary sourcing countries. The factories are not owned by Reebok. They operate under Reebok's, and later Adidas's, code of conduct. Compliance managers conduct audits. Standards are set. Progress reports are published. The workers in these factories are skilled. They assemble complex products under significant time and production pressure. The footwear industry's sourcing model, moving production to wherever labor costs allow competitive pricing, means that wages in most sourcing countries are tied to local minimums that frequently fall short of what researchers identify as living wages when actual costs of housing, food, and family care are included. This is not unique to Reebok. This is the architecture of the entire industry. But it carries specific weight in Reebok's story. The Freestyle, the shoe that launched Reebok's empire, was designed to serve women, to give them a serious athletic shoe for the first time, to recognize a market that everyone else had dismissed. The workers who now make the successor products to that shoe, who stitch the logo onto classics that sell for $80 to $120 in Western markets, are predominantly women in Southeast Asian factories, working under conditions shaped by global cost competition rather than brand values. The brand built on recognizing and serving women, that hired Jane Fonda and Gin Miller and built its entire identity on female consumers, produces its products through a manufacturing system where female workers in contract factories bear the weight of global price pressure. This is not a Reebok-specific contradiction. It is an industry-wide one. But it is still a contradiction worth naming, because the gap between a brand's stated values and the reality of how its products are made is always where the most important truths live. Why do people still buy Reebok? Not the people who wore it in the 1980s out of habit. Not the people who buy it because it's on sale. The people who choose it, deliberately, in 2026 with every other option available. Part of the answer is Allen Iverson. For a specific generation, people who watched the 2001 NBA Finals, who grew up watching Iverson crossover defenders who were a foot taller, who understood what it meant that a player the establishment tried to suppress wore Reebok, the brand carries a specific emotional weight, an authenticity, a sense that Reebok was on the side of the outsider. That feeling doesn't belong to Nike. It belongs specifically to Reebok's specific history. Part of the answer is nostalgia, which in object psychology is never really about the past. It's about who you were when you first encountered the object. The classic leather is not a 1983 shoe to the 25-year-old wearing it now. It's a signal, a statement that they choose the underdog, that they know their sneaker history. And part of the answer is something more uncomfortable. Reebok's decline is now part of its identity. The brand that was number one, that got swallowed by a corporation, that had its licenses stripped and its market surrendered and its revenues halved, and still survived, carries the psychological weight of resilience. You buy Reebok in 2026 partly because it's still here, against what the brand's 15-year Adidas chapter suggested should have been the outcome. There is something in object psychology about brands that have survived corporate damage. They carry proof, not of perfection, but of endurance. And that proof, worn on a shoe, communicates something that a commercially successful brand can never quite replicate. Behind every version of Reebok, the Aerobics empire, the Iverson era, the Adidas decline, the ABG revival, there are workers. In 1895, Joseph William Foster's first employee was probably himself. By the time Reebok reached its peak in the 1980s, it employed people in manufacturing, distribution, design, and retail across multiple countries. By the Adidas era, the direct employment picture had become increasingly narrow. Under ABG's ownership, Reebok's Boston headquarters employs around 450 people. They focus on design and brand oversight. The physical production, the cutting, stitching, lasting, quality checking, packaging, happens in contract factories across Asia. The Boston employees, the designers, brand managers, marketing strategists who shape what Reebok looks like and means, work in a Seaport District office building. Comfortable, creative, reflecting the kind of environment a premium brand is expected to provide. The contract factory workers who make what those designers design, who work in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in Bangladesh, operate in a different economic reality entirely. Shifts that can extend under production pressure, wages governed by local minimums. The kind of repetitive precision labor that builds skill over years but rarely builds wealth. The freestyle, the shoe that started everything, was designed to serve women who wanted to be active, who wanted to be taken seriously, who wanted a shoe made for them rather than adapted from a man's shoe. The workers who make the freestyle's descendants today are mostly women. They are skilled. They are necessary. They are largely invisible in the story Reebok tells about itself. When Reebok was winning, when it was the number one brand in the world, it had the resources to have genuinely shaped manufacturing conditions at scale. When it was declining under Adidas, those resources shrank. When it was sold for $2.5 billion, the workers in the supply chain had no seat at the table. Their conditions were not part of the negotiation. This is the consistent truth beneath brand stories. The people who make the product are never the people who benefit most from the product's cultural meaning. The shoe becomes a symbol, the hands that made it get no part of the symbol. In Reebok's case, a brand explicitly built around serving people who were overlooked, that gap carries particular weight. Paul Fireman sold Reebok in 2005 because Nike was growing faster than he could stop it alone. He believed Adidas would take the brand somewhere he couldn't. He was wrong. Or rather, he was right about Adidas's intentions and wrong about what those intentions would produce. Adidas spent $3.8 billion in 15 years demonstrating that it is possible to own the number 2 brand in your market and make every decision that ensures it stays, and falls further, behind. They called it brother versus brother. What it actually was the bigger brother taking everything the smaller one had built and using it to grow his own room. Reebok still exists. Authentic Brands Group is trying. The Iverson connection is real. The Shaq connection is real. The classic leather is still on shelves. The freestyle silhouette is still being worn. Whether that constitutes survival or just very slow decline is a question the next 5 years will answer. But here is what is certain. In 1895, a 14-year-old boy made a shoe in his bedroom in Bolton because he believed he could make someone run faster. His grandsons named their company after an antelope because they found the word in a dictionary their grandfather won in a race. A camping equipment salesman from Boston built that name into the number 1 brand in the world by seeing women as athletes before anyone else did. A basketball player from Hampton, Virginia chose loyalty over money, and had that loyalty protected in a trust fund he can't touch until 2030. And a German company paid almost $4 billion for all of that, and still managed to make it smaller. The shoe on your feet, if it says Reebok, carries all of that. A bedroom in Bolton, an aerobics class in California, an NBA crossover dribble, a lifetime contract, a German acquisition, a fire sale, a slow rebuilding. It survived. Not cleanly, not without damage. But the name that came from a dictionary that was won in a race is still in the race. Whether it's winning is another story entirely.